WireWheel's Privacy Rollup, a weekly look at top news and privacy from our CPO, Rick Buck. Hi, Rick. Let's talk privacy today. How are you?
I'm great, Janine. How are you this week?
Doing well, thank you. So, one of the hot topics in recent privacy news is China's passing of a new national privacy law. It sounds like it's due to take effect on November 1st. Give me a little bit of give us a little more information on it.
Yep. So this is certainly a hot topic. You're correct. It's one we've all been thinking about for a while. The Personal Information Protection Law, PIPL, however people are going to pronounce that, has undergone, I think now, 3 drafts. The third draft is the language that was passed. That happened last week. And as you mentioned, it takes effect starting November 1. Let's talk about this from a couple points of view. One of which is that, this now is the third piece of 3 different laws that China has that deal with privacy and security. So from a macro point of view, this is a comprehensive privacy law that protects the people living in the People's Republic of China. In a lot of respects, it looks a lot like GDPR. It contemplates lawfulness and purpose of processing, data minimization, privacy rights, protecting minors, consent, transferring data, and it has some pretty strict penalties. It differs from GDPR in some respects, and I'll get to that after I give you a kind of an overview of what the law is all about. So the law applies to processing personal information of Chinese individuals happening outside of China if you provide products or services to individuals in China, if you are using data to analyze or assess behavior of individuals in China, or other purposes to be specified by laws and regulations within China. So companies doing business in China should be thinking about what this actually means for them. And let me address some of the considerations. I'm going to talk about things at a very high level and just summarizing some of the basic functionality of the law. My overall takeaway is that if you're doing business in China and it involves the transfer, the collection, or the processing of personal information, you should probably spend time with your legal counsel, with your privacy team, and put your strategy together on how you're going to start to think about complying with China. So on a positive side, let's talk about all the good things that are part of this new law. PIPL talks about a legal basis of processing, much in the way that the GDPR does. Certainly the obvious basis for processing is that you have consent. If you don't have consent, familiar conditions in their law are necessity to perform a contract, necessity to perform statutory obligations, the need to respond to public health emergencies or protect life. They have a couple interesting ones to carry out news reports, public opinion supervision, and other facts for the public interest, or the processing of information to be closed by individuals or other legally disclosed personal information within a reasonable scope in accordance with Chinese law. And then my favorite one, other circumstances stipulated by laws and administrative regulations. But in general, the legal basis for processing has familiarity to GDPR. I like that they think about a data minimization concept. And the law calls for processing the minimum necessary data commensurate with the processing activity. So again, consider principles of lawfulness and fairness and necessity and good faith. Consider that the data that you're collecting has a clear purpose and it's directly related to the purpose of which it was collected. And then lastly, a data retention mentality where the law refers to the shortest necessary time to achieve the processing purpose. So, limit your data to what's necessary, and limit the processing of that data to what you've said you're going to do with it, and then get rid of it as quickly as you can, right?
Right.
On the data subject rights, again, looks very familiar to GDPR. They have a right to information. They have a right to access. They have a right to correction, a right to portability. You have the right to objective processing. You have the right to withdraw consent, and the right to be able to not have a sacrifice of services if you withdraw consent or don't give consent. You have a right to deletion. And an interesting right here is that a surviving family of a naturally deceased person has the ability to, so I'll read it, their exact wording. In the event of a natural person's death, close relatives may, for their own lawful and legitimate purpose, exercise the rights of access, copy, correction, deletion, etc., to the relevant information of the deceased. Oh, wow. So your family has the ability to exercise your privacy rights after you passed away. So right. I kind of like, at least at face value, what that means. They address sensitive information, as all the recent privacy laws do, and sensitive information contains things like what you would expect: medical, financial, health, which is medical, obviously, biometric, facial recognition, and of course, minors. And minors are people under 14 in China.
Right.
From a localization point of view, this one's interesting. They talk about data being collected about people in the People's Republic as being needing to stay in the People's Republic, and they talk about obligations for critical information providers. The crux of this language is around internet service providers, around big data companies, and China's concern for their ability to collect and have access to huge amounts of big data and use that data inappropriately.
Right, right.
They talk about cross-border transfers, right? And so much like GDPR, you need to have the right processes in place to transfer data outside of China. However, in China's case, you need to get permission, literally get permission from the Chinese government. So you'll need to do an assessment given by the Chinese government about the nature of the transfer. And then other security obligations will be tied to that.
Right.
From a data breach point of view, there's a notification requirement. And then from a penalty point of view, fairly strict penalties of up to, I think, will be the equivalent of 5% of your annual turnover. So it looks a lot like GDPR in that respect.
Yeah.
So hats off to the Chinese for putting together a comprehensive privacy law. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. You had gotten to, the penalties, the 5%, and I also read 7 million.
So that's American dollars. Yeah. So it's a million RMB, which is approximately 7 million American dollars.
Right.
There are provisions in the law which are good, that restrict outside governmental access to personal information about Chinese citizens. So, contemplating things like Schrems, there's controls for outside government agencies to be able to access information without having gotten the permission to do so. But that's, in my opinion, where the comparisons to GDPR end. Again, hats off to the Chinese for passing a comprehensive privacy bill. But as we've talked about in the past, it's an interesting juxtaposition against things like their position with human rights, things like their disregard for intellectual property, and of most concern, there is no language apparently in the new law that talks about their own use of data for surveillance purposes, and how people within their country are protected in that way. There was a quote in an article that I read recently from the great Omar Tene from the IAPP. He's their chief knowledge officer. His quote is, "If you're doing business in China, get legal advice. They're not playing around." And I couldn't agree more with Omar's sentiments. Certainly Google him if you don't know who Omar is already. He's one of the great minds in the privacy industry. And I take a lot of stock in his cautionary advice here. That's the long and short of the new law. The WireWheel platform obviously is here to help our clients, make their way through honoring subject rights and doing assessments and so forth. But the bigger picture is, how do you comply with this law in general, and what are the real nuancy things that you should be considering? The law goes much deeper than this brief synopsis, and again, I would highly recommend you reach out to your legal counsel if China is a market where you're considering doing business or you're currently doing business. But gives us all something to think about in the ever-evolving world of privacy and privacy legislation.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. It's clear that we are in an ever evolving world. So, it's great. Thanks definitely for this update. News is buzzing. I can hardly go to, a news site where this isn't, one of the top stories. So, thanks for this information on what's happening in China. And of course, every week, what's happening in the world of privacy all the way around. So I want to thank you. Thanks to our viewers again for tuning in to WireWheel's weekly privacy roll-up. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at marketing@wirewheel.io, and we will get back to you. And I'd also like to encourage you to like this video and subscribe to WireWheel's YouTube channel as well. And again, thank you, Rick, for your time today. And thanks for keeping us all informed.
Always my great pleasure, Janine. Thank you again for hosting, and thank you to all who take the time to listen to this. We'll see you next week.